If you want to get up some techie, loose, tricky climbs, if you like the sound of helicopters while you're watching reviews, you can stay tuned. We have one coming over really soon.
We're testing new trail bikes in Whistler, BC, and one of the newest is Yeti's SB140, which has a lot of parallels with the current SB130. The geometry has been adjusted slightly as well, which includes size-specific seat angles and chainstay lengths, and the new frame also offers much more down-tube clearance and an evolved version of Yeti's Switch Infinity suspension layout. Our bike is the SB140 Lunch Ride Turk, which gets a 160mm Fox 36 factory fork, Float X shock, a wireless axis drivetrain, and Code brakes. All that adds up to $10,200 American, but let's find out what it means on the trail. Kaz, when I think of Switch Infinity suspension, I think about how well-rounded it has been in the past. Like pretty good climbing, relatively efficient, lots of traction at the same time too. And that's kind of how I felt about this thing. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think that carries over. I think traction is really what it's all about. This bike was the one that I felt like I had the most grip, almost like that rear wheel is just digging into the ground, so you can really get up some tricky stuff, especially around here where it's pretty loose. We luckily avoided rain this time around, but there's so much kind of that fine, silty soil, and this bike could really just claw its way up, and it's traction is the name of the game here.
Yeah, for sure. And at the same time, it does feel relatively efficient. I don't want to spoil the efficiency test results for everybody who's holding their breath for that one, but it actually had the slowest time, and I don't believe it, to be honest. It doesn't feel like that on the trail.
Yeah, I mean, maybe, who knows, efficiency versus traction, there could be something there, but I think that, if you are someone that likes technical climbs, this bike is a really good one for that.
Why, though? Explain why, Kaz. Not just the traction.
Yeah, traction, I mean, the overall handling. I think the head angle is a little bit steeper than some of the other bikes, which we'll probably talk about that in the descending as well, but for climbing, it does have a 65-degree head angle with a 160 fork, so that's a degree steeper than some of the other bikes we have here. And that's noticeable. That handling difference is noticeable, especially if you're in tighter, slower speed stuff. It does make it a little bit easier just to kind of tip the bike around the corners and things. Yeah,
I feel like that's almost like classic Yeti move too. Like it's dialed back just a little bit and it really helps the bike in those sort of situations. It's very good at getting around stuff, and it almost seems like if you're a kind of person who wants more bike, but at the same time, you don't want a bike that's going to really hold you back on the climbs, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think for me, I probably would, if this is my own bike, I would go with a 40 mil stem and a little higher rise bar, just to kind of fit the overall feel that I'm looking for in most bikes these days. And some of that could have to do with the person that designed the bike, or even Yeti's location in Colorado. More wider, open terrain, not as many steep descents, and they're kind of looking for that positioning. But I just think a little more upright would work for me. But that said, it does have a steep enough seat tube angle, and like the cockpit length and everything's not too long. So all the numbers are fairly modern in that regard.
Let's talk about downhill performance, and I want to stay on something you just said, the position, Kaz. This bike has a fairly short head tube. It's got a 160 mil fork. It's a little bit steeper. Can you explain to me why that might not be the ideal combo in somewhere like here where the terrain could be a little aggressive?
Yeah, I think you just end up feeling pretty far over the front, and it just has that kind of pointier sensation where you just don't feel, it's harder to relax going into some of these steep maneuvers. As you compress that fork, the head angle is going to get even steeper. So if you're starting at a 65-degree head angle with a 160 fork, as it goes through, it gets even steeper. So it just feels like you're you got to be on your toes a little bit more on this bike. You can't let it run quite as well as you could. Say like that Scott that we have also has a 160 fork, but it also has a 64-degree head tube angle. So that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't want to put more fork on the front of this bike to slacken that out, would you? Because it'd be a little unbalanced and...
Yeah, exactly. So you're already looking at a 140, 160, a 170 just wouldn't really make sense. So this is kind of like the lunch ride edition, so it has the longer fork. But if you go with the non-lunch ride edition, that has a 150 mil fork and also the corresponding steeper head tube angle. Yeah, so Again, and we mentioned that shorter head tube. It also plays in there. The stack is a little bit lower, so you just kind of get over the front of the bike a little bit more than the other ones.
The Yeti here, we're kind of nitpicking, but like obviously it's extremely capable when it's steep. Like we rode all the steep things, of course, but it does give you a bit more over the front of a feeling, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that we'd be less likely to mention this as much if it didn't already have that 160 fork.
Yeah.
So, if a bike feels a little steep, a lot of times you can put a fork on that's 10, 20 mils longer. You can, fulfill all your slack bike needs, but this one, it's not that slack even with the big long fork. So that's kind of where it goes. I think that for the right person, it's going to be great. It's going to be that all-rounder. We are in Whistler where trails tend to be steeper, rockier, rougher than a lot of the world. So we have to recognize that. But just for here, it just didn't wow me as much on the steeps as some of the other bikes. But when it comes to suspension performance, how'd that go?
Again, just like good at all the things, Kaz. Like quite active off the top, quite supportive. I never felt a hard bottom on this thing. It just really works well.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of bikes with more traction. I tend to prioritize that more over efficiency. Like I want a bike that grips, especially around here where it does rain sometimes. It hasn't in months, but eventually it'll rain.
It's almost as slippery as if it's been wet out there.
It's true.
So dry.
Yeah. So for this bike, it does have nice traction, really kind of just contours the ground well. And I like that. So that really like how the suspension performed, makes the most out of its 140 again. No harsh bottom mounts. I like that.
How was it on the jumps, Kaz?
It was fine. Yeah, nothing out of the ordinary to report back.
Normal.
Yep, we could do it. Again, just, some of the higher speeds, you did notice there's like that little edge to it where there's some of the other bikes. Again, we're in a bike park. They're not quite, some of the trails.
Riding trail bike trails though, we're not riding anything that's like way over this bike's head.
No, it just felt like you kind of would reach, maybe speed limit's the wrong word, but it just didn't feel quite as easy to maintain those speeds as some of the other ones. And I think that's just a little bit to do with the handling, the positioning, and that steeper head tube angle. I think if it was me, I would just go with a little shorter reach and a slacker head tube angle just to balance that out, keep the wheelbase similar, but just kind of tweak the handling a bit. But again, it's going to really depend on terrain. If you're trying to get down the rowdiest, gnarliest stuff, this might not be the bike, but for a good all-around trail bike, a little bit mellower terrain, the suspension's great. Yeah,
Kaz, I would say for a lot of the trails that I like to ride, which aren't the rowdiest trails out there, I mean, we're still in the Sea to Sky quarter, so they're still tricky, but I want to cover ground more than ride the steepest thing. I think a bike like this Yeti would really suit me, to be honest. Yeah, and would suit other people out there that have the same priorities. Let's move on to time testing. Kaz, how did it do on the downhill?
This is actually my slowest time was on this bike.
Oh.
Yeah, and I don't know why, it just happened to be slower than the other ones. There wasn't a particular reason.
I mean, we talked about the angles and they felt like a speed limit almost, but...
Yeah, but this trail was pretty twisty. I kind of thought it would have done a little bit better, but in any case, this was the bike that I put down my slowest timed downhill lap on.
Well, Kaz, this bike also had the slowest time at the efficiency test, 2 minutes. That's 7 seconds slower than the winner over 2 minutes. And I always say, guys, don't put too much stock in these times. Like, this is not science. It just gives us, another thing to talk about. And a lot of times it matches what our riding impressions say. And that's the case this time, especially with your downhill time, eh? Kaz, let's zoom in on some of the components and the frame details. Tell me what you liked, tell me what you didn't.
Yeah, this is another frame where the details, they've had some time to kind of really go over each little piece of it and make it well sorted out. So I think it's got that threaded bottom bracket this year, which is great to see. Internal cable routing is well done. They've also adjusted the switch infinity system a little bit, the position of the bearings on the upper part of the link. They're now in the link itself rather than on the carbon part of the frame. Just should make servicing it a little bit easier. So a lot of things for the end consumer or the mechanics out there, just make things as hassle-free as possible.
Kaz, what did you think of the build on this thing?
I like the spec on this bike. It's what Yeti calls their lunch ride category. So basically, as we mentioned before, it gets that little longer travel fork, a little bit burlier components to get code brakes versus say G2, beefier tires if we weren't using control tires. So overall, it's kind of all the parts that I think most aggressive riders would like. Again, good to see the code brakes, aluminum wheels, which for the price, I don't know, like you're looking at a $10,000 bike with aluminum wheels, but they're great aluminum wheels. They're DT Swiss 1700s, so they're proven. They held up really well with all the smashing. It's really, this bike, there weren't any component issues that I can think of.
Yeah, it just seemed to work well.
Yeah, high-end stuff. You hope that there'd be high-end performance. In this case, there was.
Kaz, most of the bikes that we have here are pretty expensive bicycles, and obviously that includes the Yeti. What do you make of the other models and the build kit? Which one would you buy?
Yeah, I mean, this is another case where there's no aluminum model, so there's really no even close to affordable option. The entry-level price point is $6,200. The build kit on that is good. You're getting a Shimano SLX XT drivetrain. And by good, I don't mean that the price, like the value proposition is good, but the parts themselves are good, solid parts. Because sometimes you do see things that are really low end at a high price, not good. So this is a high price with solid workhorse components, but still, I mean, $6,200, that's probably nobody's first mountain bike. And then if you wanted to build it up from the frame only, you're looking at $4,500.
Kaz, we've got this Norco here. I know it's two very different things. The Norco's aluminum, like blah, 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 whatever. $4,000 for that bike. Yeah. It's a pretty good bike.
Yeah.
It's $500 less expensive than that Yeti frame. I know carbon and things, but I'm just saying.
No, yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. But so again, basically when it comes to value, you know, this bike performs well, but the value, you're not getting a screaming deal no matter which one you're looking at.
Okay, that brings us to pros and cons. One of the big pros to me is, well, I mean, we ragged on how the bike felt a little bit pointy before when we were talking about descending, but I think that also makes this a pretty well-rounded 140 millimeter travel bike that's very capable with a 160 fork up front. And that means it's gonna work in a lot of places. It works well here as well, even if it did feel a little pointier, but I mean, the majority of the world isn't Whistler. You know, they're not trail riding in Whistler. They're trail riding in places that are maybe a little less aggressive terrain. So I think it'd be great in the majority of places.
Yeah, I think that, it's a great climber. We mentioned that, really good traction. And also the overall feel of the bike itself. You know, sometimes frame stiffness can come into play or just overall level of bike feeling harsh. There's none of that with the Yeti. The Yeti has, you know, I want to say a little bit softer. I don't mean that in a noodly mushy way, but just means that it doesn't jar you. It's not super harsh. So I think it has a really nice blend there. So you combine that and the traction coming from the suspension. It's just a comfy bike to ride.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a pro.
Let's talk about a con now. In my mind, if we're not talking about prices, really only one con. And I mean, I feel kind of two-faced because we just said it was a pro, but at the same time, we're riding the Yeti back to back to back against some other pretty good trail bikes. Kaz, the Geo, the front end with the 160 fork.
Yeah, I think that, it's just a little bit steeper than some of the other ones. And then the head tube length, the really short head tube, just might make it feel a little bit pointier than some people are looking for, especially if they're wanting to get a bike in this category for riding more aggressive terrain.
All right, Kaz, I am itching to go for a ride. So let's wrap this up by telling everybody who the new SB140 best suits.
Yeah. I think this bike is a great bike for someone that prioritizes traction on the climbs, someone that seeks out technical climbs, doesn't want that rear wheel spinning wildly. This could be the bike for you. It's also a really comfortable ride, not overly harsh or stiff. But for somebody that really wants to push things and be as aggressive as possible and wants the absolute slackest, longest machine, it doesn't fit the bill. But for a good generalist, super comfortable, that's the SB140.
There you go. That's our review of Yeti's new SB140. Let us know what you think of the bike in the comments below, and stay tuned for our roundtable video where we're going to compare these bikes in a lot more detail, as well as the huck to flat, the efficiency test, and of course, the impossible climb. We'll see you there.